Well, good day, everybody. Welcome to this month's Zoominar related to how do we manage time wisely? How do we budget stuff for family and ministry and work and all the other stuff that crowds into our lives? How do we do that well? We have some excellent guests today. To kick things off this morning, please let me ask Andy Owens from Eastern Kentucky FCA, if you would, please pray, sir.
Okay. Dear Jesus, just thank you so much for the opportunity to gather together this morning, dear Lord, and just thank you for these men and women and their heart to serve you, dear Lord, and to reach athletes and coaches. And I just thank you for a community that we have, that we can get together, encourage one another, share ideas with one another, dear God, and just how, even though I've not met most of these people, they're family, dear God. We just thank you for that. Bless our time together. I pray that we would leave here with new ideas that we can apply to ministry, to our lives, to our families, dear God, so that we can honor you in all that we do. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Andy. If you're on the meeting today and you're not speaking at the moment, if you could mute your mics, that will help us a bunch. Secondly, here's some stuff coming up right away and then in future months. This is a new app that's been put together by Seed Sports for the sports chaplains community. This thing is gaining traction all over the world, and it's a good place for, one, connecting with those sports chaplains. The message section kind of works like social media. There's also events section in that lets you know what's coming up, whether there's Zoominars like this or conferences or other things that are going to happen. There are groups built within this. So if you're an FCA guy like me, there's an FCA group where it's just all FCA chaplains. And if you wanted to send something straight to FCA character coaches, sports chaplains, it could go to that group only. Other things like that, a map of the world where these sports chaplains are located, where you can find someone. Suppose somebody from the University of Maryland is going to go play basketball in Europe, and that player is going to be in Dusseldorf. You could kind of look at the map and see if there's anybody serving well in Dusseldorf. You could connect, try to get your player to connect with a sports chaplain for that club, things of that nature. That's there all the time. That URL at the top is how you can connect with that. It's both a website and it's a good app as well. So you can access it either way. Find it in the Google store or in the Apple store. Here's one coming up later this month. We're going to do a Zoominar related to how do you deal with media well, if you do it at all. Some of us have media in our circle of friends and acquaintances, and so how we speak with them is important. So I have people coming from radio, from print, from TV, all different sorts of angles to help us understand what do they value, what do we need, how do we work well together in a wise manner that's honorable to the Lord in our service. That's coming up in 2 weeks. Then how do we partner with churches? This is for those of us who are looking for people to serve as volunteers, character coaches in schools, communities, wherever we're placing people. Finding a way to partner well with churches is a big part of this. And we're going to have some folks who are very good at this share with us the kind of the ins and outs of how they've been doing that way. And then later on, we'll talk with some folks who have been battling disease and other things that makes us deal with our own frailty. I'm about to turn 65, and man, my body doesn't work the same at 65 as it did at 35. It's just different. And so how do we deal with some of those things that kind of pull at our humanness in this and make us figure out how to do ministry in spite of our frailty as human beings? That's coming up in May. Another one coming up in June is going to be this one with a whole bunch of smart people. We have folks from the academic world going to talk with us about sports chaplaincy and academia, where those things are meeting, how they as academics have something to contribute to we who are practitioners, to us who are practitioners, and vice versa, how our work on the ground doing this every day with people can inform their work as academics in the subject. That's coming up in June. Then we'll probably take the summer off and take a breather. But anyway, here those things are coming. For today, I'd like to first start with a quick introduction of our guests, having you each give us a little personal background on yourselves, little bit, and if you have family, tell us about that. Let's start with Patricia Hollowell in Maryland.
All right. Well, I am the director for FCA at the University of Maryland. I've been there for a little over 6 years. I have 4 kids, and our oldest we adopted when she was a teenager. So she came potty trained and with a driver's license, which was fantastic. And then our younger 3 are 17, 15, and 12.
Wow.
And so life is never boring here.
Fantastic. That's excellent. How about Dr. Gomes? You're muted, Doc.
I got saved. I was 17 years old from New Bedford, Mass. Man, I'll tell you what, I've been married 43 years. I told my wife if I had known what was in this package, I would have chased her a long time ago. We have 2 children, both married, and they both have 2 children. So we have 4 grandchildren. I would say I've been serving as a chaplain 31 years, 21 years here at Liberty, but excited about being with you guys today.
Fantastic. Thank you, sir. DP, Doug Pollock up in Springfield, Illinois. Tell us about you, DP.
Okay, I am your FCA area rep here in Springfield, Illinois. 73 years old. I've been single all my life. Basically came to know the Lord in my early 30s. So I was lost for a good portion of that time. I tell people I had a drug problem growing up. I was drugged to church every Sunday and wasn't getting it. So I worked 35 years plus as a controller for a national engineering firm, and first got involved with FCA as a volunteer back in 1995. Then a few years later, I went part-time with FCA, and then about 18 years ago, went full-time. And I've been, I know Ed mentioned he'd been doing the chaplain thing for 30 some years. That's about the same with me also. So that's it, Raj.
Great. Thank you so much. As you're listening and you want to jump in with a question, there's 2 ways to do that. You could write it in the chat at the bottom of the page, or you could ask it out loud as we come a little later in the, I have some questions I've kind of teed up for today. We'll open the mics later on, and you can ask yours out loud if you prefer. First, for each of you 3, how do you set the priorities that help you budget time wisely? How do you set priorities that help you budget time in a wise manner? Who would like to jump in there first?
I'll jump in, Raj.
Go ahead.
One is I try to make my relationship with God the number 1 priority. And my thought there is that if I'm not developing my relationship, then it becomes obvious to my wife, to my children, to those I'm working with. So I really, I try to make that a priority. Mm-hmm. Now, for example, for me, I'm a morning person, so I'm jumping in the Word. I'm spending time in prayer in the morning, but sometimes something may come up that changes that schedule. Mm-hmm. And so what I'll do, Raj, I'll give myself 24 hours. I'm not going to beat myself up. It's a relationship that I have with God. And in fact, I remember one time, Raj, I got so busy that I didn't spend time in the Word or in prayer that day. And so it was about 11:45 at night. And so the conversation kind of went like this. Ed, obviously today you did not make spending time in the Word a priority. Yeah, you're right, God, you're right. In fact, Ed, you know that if you were to get into the Word right now, all you're going to do is your head's going to bop. Yeah, you're right about that. So God said, hey, I'll tell you what, Ed, I'll see you in the morning. Get a good night's rest. It's a relationship.
Yeah.
And so I try to make that a priority, Rod. The second thing is I try to stay in my lane. You know, because it's so easy to get in someone else's lane and spend more time trying to straighten someone else out. So I try to stay in my lane And by that, I mean, what is my passion? What is my mission? And my passion, my mission is to help our young men become intentional about their relationship with God and make an impact on our football team. So I'll keep that in front of me.
Yeah.
And then, Rod, something I have found helpful is, what are the expectations of the head coach? What are the expectations of the coaches, and that type of thing? So I would say the goal is to maintain my relationship with God, stay in my lane, and know what the expectations are from me so that I can balance that.
Right. I mean, there's the perspective of a guy who's 30 plus years into this, has this very specific role. He's also a father, grandfather, empty nest. That looks like that. Patricia, what does it look like at your household?
So I would definitely echo what Ed had to say as far as prioritizing time with God. So I get up early so that's really the only time my house is quiet. I have teenagers, so they're up until I go to bed. So if I get up early, that's when I can have the house to myself and really spend time in the Word. But I would say beyond that, it is understanding the difference between important and urgent.
Brilliant.
And so, the tyranny of the urgent, right, calls us all the time, constantly. And so knowing what is important today, I have a day planner that I write things down in. It has a page for every day. And so, exactly. So I have my calendar on my phone, but for me, being able to write down what's important so that I can be able to prioritize that stuff, because I get called away from my computer constantly. My kids are still all in virtual school.
Wow.
And so, thank you. You can hear one from the other room. And so I constantly, hey mom, hey, can you help me with something? And, being able to come back and not be still distracted and look down and say, here's what I was working on. Here's what's important. Here's where we're going, helps me to stay focused.
Brilliant. Good. DP, totally different kind of world. How do you manage these things?
Okay, actually, I'm going to piggyback off what they said, because I think what Ed said is most important: our personal development, our personal growth. Because if we're not growing, then we've got nothing to give anyone else. Mm-hmm. But apart from that, and I'm also an early morning person, so that's why they room us together, Raj, because we get up at the early hours. But really, my situation, my priorities are pretty much set around discipleship. In other words, not only when I'm meeting with individual athletes and coaches, teams, groups, but the key thing for me is also preparation time. I treat that discipleship as if like a pastor would prepare for a message, on Sunday. And so there's got to be times where, I'm going to be diligently studying the Word and not distracted by other things that seem even more important to ministry people. And so that meeting times, setting priorities by discipleship, those are the big rocks. And those have to get in the aquarium before anything else comes in. And as long as I can do that, I'll be fine. But I'll tell you, and I think we'll get to this later when you talk about conflicting factors. We have them, I'll tell you. Mm-hmm. But so anyway, that's where my priorities revolve around, Rod's discipleship ministry. That's basically what I've been doing for forever.
Yeah. Yep, for sure. Well, you teed it up. Let me ask the question directly now. What are the factors that cause you conflicts in your time management, and how do you resolve those conflicts that always pop up? Let's start with you, Patricia, because there's got to be a myriad of those things with a house full of kids. How do you resolve those conflicts as they arise?
Well, I think, ministry is endless, right? Mm-hmm. Or it can be. And obviously family is endless as well. And so knowing how to merge the two has been really a great thing for me. And so being able to live an integrated life where I am available for my family, obviously, our children are our first priority ministry wise, but then also being able to make my ministry at Maryland a priority as well. And so pre-pandemic, one of my rules was if I have to go back down to Maryland for anything in the evening, um, other than huddle, I would take someone with me. So if I'm going back for a game or an event, either my husband would go or one of the kids would get to come with me, and then they get to be a part of the ministry with me as well. And then in my ministry with the Washington Spirit, I'm also the chaplain for our soccer team in DC. We do family dinner once a month. So the girls would come over to the house and get to know the family and be able to be a part of our family life. And so it makes the family feel like they're part of the ministry with me, and I'm able to integrate the two of them.
Love it. So instead of compartmentalizing things where we pull these things apart and think, all right, I'm going to guard this time and it's 100% this, but sometimes you're merging those things together.
Right.
Love that. Yeah. I did that with my son. I would take him with me to ball games. Now he's 43, but I would take him to go with me to practices or something else. And so he got to experience this with me. And yeah, that was excellent. Brilliant. Good. Other thoughts, Ed or Doug? How are you managing these conflicts that invariably pop up?
You know, one of the things that I was thinking of back from the last question you asked is this thing of flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like Doug said, you know, he has a schedule. You know, he's scheduling those appointments, and I think sometimes, I know for me, our guys sometimes don't fully understand what goes into scheduling those appointments. And one of the things that I tell our guys, hey, listen, let's make this a priority. Now, if something comes up that you have no control over, I'm the liaison between student conduct and our football team. So I'll say, hey, if Coach Freeze were to say, hey, listen, Gomes, I want you to go to student conduct, well, that person knows that there's nothing that I can do to protect that time. So a flexibility, but also not allowing myself to get frustrated when that athlete is not being as responsible as he should be. And sometimes I may say something, or sometimes I just might wait for another time to have the conversation with him. So I guess the answer to your question, Roger, is when the schedule changes for whatever reason, be flexible. You know, because sometimes I can say something to one of the players and it really doesn't help the conversation, doesn't help the relationship. Yeah. So being able to be flexible.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, especially this year of all years, everything's been so crazy fluid that things change all the time. And to the things that would appear to be big priorities, like we have a game Saturday. Well, in our league, we had a game canceled 3 hours to game time 2 weeks ago. Like, you're kidding me. Stuff like that. Type A old German boy would rather everything be super tight and click and boom. But man, right now, I have to be crazy fluid to be able to just maintain relationships, let alone maintain my schedule. So I have to prioritize people over most anything else. Yeah. Doug, your thoughts about this?
Yeah, I'd like to pick up on what Ed said because about the flexibility, because I think one of the most important things for me, and I learned this a long time ago, the hard way, is to build margin into whatever schedule you've got. Because I'm sure the other two guests would agree that I can't remember a day that came out the way it was planned. You know, there's always something that comes up. And, you know, when I was in corporate America, I used to interview a lot of college students on job fair days. And I remember this one instance, they'd give me their resumes and everything. And I remember asking this one kid, I said, how long have you had trouble setting priorities? And he looked at me like, what are you talking about? And I said, there's no way you can get all this stuff done. But if you do not build margin into your schedule, then you're going to be in chaos, because you're going to have to eliminate some things you don't want to eliminate or you're going to have to be anxious about stuff. You're going to disappoint some people because you're going to have to cancel some things. So I think that building margin is crucial. But really, one of my biggest conflicts, Roger, is actually with other ministry people. And I'm probably going to step on some feet here if I was at an FCA staff meeting, but that's okay. At 73, you can sort of say anything you want to anymore. But a lot of activities we could plug into our schedule. They look important. They probably feed our egos and make us feel important. They probably look great on an Excel spreadsheet, but they're really not that important. And so I think it's crucial that we just not do things to try to make our ministry look good, because counting the nickels and noses, and I know Ed knows Ron Brown from he's been a friend of mine for 40 years, and from his time at Liberty, and that was a favorite phrase of Ron. He said, "I'm not into counting nickels and noses," because you can get to the end of the week and say, man, if I texted or called about 8 or 10 more coaches, boy, would that look good on a spreadsheet. But I think it's ironic, Roger, when a lot of times we're trying to veer our athletes and coaches away from being focused on the scoreboard. That's not the most important thing. But here, what are we getting locked into so many times? Yeah, stupid numbers. So I think that's the biggest conflict for me, that I have to stay away from that stuff, irrespective of what somebody else might say.
Yep. Hey, let's chase that rabbit just for a minute. How, Patricia, how do you build margin into your daily schedule, or let's say your weekly schedule even, so that there is a little bit of flex room to adjust day to day? How do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, there's the minute detail kind of things where my student leader meetings are scheduled for 45 minutes. So if I back up against the next hour, I still have 15 minutes to have a conversation with someone at the end of it. Our coaches' huddles are scheduled for 45 minutes. So little things like that, I build margin in, and then in larger ways, making sure that I have time in the evening to be able to, maybe have a conversation with my husband, or, I prioritize picking up one of our kids from their sports practice so that I can have a conversation with them in the car. Little things like that, where I'm prioritizing people by building in margin into the schedule.
Love it. But Ed, how do you go about building some margin so that, as you mentioned, you can be flexible enough to work with people?
One of the things that I do, if I have let's say I have a 30-minute meeting, and I always tell the guys, if we don't start on time, we'll always end on time, out of respect for other people's schedules. Good. So there have been times when guys maybe, they went a little longer in a team meeting, or went a little longer in the weight room. So now instead of 30 minutes, I have 15 minutes. So, but he knows that if we don't start on time, and sometimes it's even me, I might be, in a staff meeting, and I'm going to text the guy and say, hey, listen, I'm going to be about 10 minutes late. He knows that if we don't start on time, we're going to end on time.
Gotcha.
So that allows me to not get frustrated and think that I've got to jam everything into that 15 minutes. And this guy might be somebody that I'm meeting with every other week. So I just have to be patient and just wait, and we'll pick it up, on the next one.
That's really good. It costs you something because you have to flex to what, but you're not demanding everybody else flex to you. That's a healthy approach. I like that a lot. This is one of those things I learned traveling to Latin America in the 90s, sitting with this guy who was from Texas, 6'6" tall gringo in the middle of Honduras. And we're talking about how he organizes his day, given that anybody who in Honduras who wears a watch, it's only there for decoration. Nobody cares what time it is. It doesn't really matter because they're an agrarian society. It's about what time you finish the task, not time when you start it or you finish it.
Oh, yes.
So it's much more driven by like farm work than it is like factory work. Most things in the US are still on an industrial kind of construct of time. And so what I learned from him was he said, look, I never schedule more tightly than one thing in the morning, one thing in the afternoon, one thing at night. Because this way, he said, I can bump into more good ministry because I'm relaxed enough to see it. Whereas I was coming from the business world where the more calls you make, the more business you do and the more money you make. I'm like, holy smoke, I was a stress machine trying to stay on top of all those things. And it just wore me out. Since I adapted this approach, I'm much more flexible, Ed. I can see things with greater margin and I can notice what's happening over here intuitively and actually serve well. That has been a huge help to me. And I still got a ton accomplished, but I'm not as stressed about it moment to moment. Any other thoughts you guys have about margin or how do you manage time so as to be most available to the people you're standing in front of?
I think the key, Roger, is, I really don't call it time management. I call it priority management. Because we've basically got the same amount of time, but it's where you set those, priorities, and that the time is going to come if you set your priorities right. And I think the other thing is we've got to understand that we're probably going to disappoint some people. Mm-hmm. First of all, maybe saying, no, I can't meet with you, or we're going to have to do this later, because a lot of times our narcissistic culture now is basically they think, well, you're thinking this isn't important. No, I'm not saying it's not important, but we still have to prioritize what is most important.
That's a great point too, because sometimes, guys will want to, or girls will want to set up a meeting during a family time. What about after, and we have to tell, what I'll say is, hey, listen, I've already got another commitment. I don't tell them what the commitment is, but the commitment might mean that my wife and I have planned to go for a walk that night, or we plan to go for a meal that night, but again, God first, family second, ministry third. And when we get that all jammed up, we get out of balance.
Good. I remember reading from John Stott in a book years ago. He said the simple way to communicate with people that I have something else in mind. He says, my schedule will not permit that. And he said, everybody almost backs off immediately. They don't need to know that it's lunch with your friend or whatever else it is, or it's a day off. Prioritize your time and you'll do well. Patricia, any further thoughts about that kind of thing?
No, I just think that's really good. And when there is the opportunity to invite whoever that is to what you're already doing, that's an opportunity as well. I know my boys play baseball, and so I've had my interns have come to some of their baseball games at this point. Excellent. And so now, my youngest is like, he thinks that the interns are like his friends, and but like it involves the family, and it allows them to be involved in your family life as well, because you don't know what kind of family they came from necessarily. And so being able to see a healthy family is also a really cool way to do ministry.
Spot on, especially for those of y'all who have family at home still. You can't assume what kind of thing they came from. And so you wind up modeling a lot of things about life in a great way with them. And that's why we still love having players, coaches to our house. I can watch the players. They're watching how I interact with my wife, how I speak to her, how she speaks to me, how we do things at our house. And it matters. Yeah, good. Other thoughts about that, or do you have a question now you'd like to jump in with? You can open your mic and ask your question of these folks. Again, thinking about how do we prioritize and manage the 24 hours per day that we have so as to be most effective. Some of y'all may have been at the FCA Chaplains conference we did up in Maryland. You remember this, Patricia? You may not have been with us yet. This is several years ago, but we were up there, and one of the guys presenting was talking about time, and he was talking about Sabbath and the necessity that we have to rest. And he hit me right between the eyes, because he says, morally speaking, looking at the 10 Commandments, morally speaking, To fail to Sabbath is equivalent to murder. You're breaking a commandment. And I was like, ouch. And so I sat there that morning and built into my online calendar a big green bar that says Sabbath every Sunday. That if I don't plan for that time, it's not going to happen. So I have to build rest into my schedule, or guess what? I'll work all the stinking time and I'll get to 3 months in and I'll think, why am I tired? Well, you knucklehead, you haven't taken a day off in weeks. What are you thinking? Finding a way to rest is super important. And I'm finding more so at 65 than it was at 45. I have to figure out how to do that. Do you have a question now, anyone?
Roger, I'd like to jump in on the rest thing that I
Please.
think, when we had one of our area rep staff meetings, I think I mentioned this, that about 10 years ago, I just started taking mini sabbaticals.
Yeah.
I take a 3-day weekend, tell nobody where I'm at. And I
Good.
remember you even asked me, where do you go? I said, I don't tell anybody. I'm not telling you either. but basically, that's my way of forcing myself, because I remember when I was in corporate America, especially the first 10 years, I was working 60, 70 hours a week. And of course, at that point, I wasn't a believer. And I thought that was the way I was earning my merit with God. But, that's the one thing that I took away to not want to get into with ministry. But it is so easy because, I got to go to this practice, better catch this game tonight. Or, and then with the chaplain stuff, you're going to be tied up on weekends a lot of times anyway. So you need to strategically, intentionally plan those times and just be real. Probably seems gruff to some people, but be adamant about it.
Mm-hmm. Patricia, how do you build in rest into your schedule that's complex because of not only work and family, but kids' schedules and all those things that come along with them?
Yeah, no, that's really good. And I was actually thinking, so about 2 months ago, I actually went away on a trip, much like what Doug was just talking about. All my kids were in the house all the time doing school. My husband had lost his job, so he was in the house all the time. And just, we were all in the house all the time together. And I was like, somebody's got to go. So it's going to be me. And a friend of mine was going out of town for a couple of days, and she lives by herself in this beautiful house out of state. And she had offered that I could stay at her house. And so I did. I took her up on it, and he called it a mini sabbatical, but I took a couple of days and I got away, and I informed everyone I'm not checking email.
You did that to get away
just
from me?
need time. And it was fantastic. It was exactly the spiritual rest that I needed. But sometimes you just have to know that you've reached that point where, mommy needs a timeout. We're like, I just need a break. And being able to know that and be willing to say, here's what I'm going to do. And listen, everybody got fed. Everybody got where they needed to go.
Yeah. Ministry
continued. Sometimes we think that it can't go on without us, and we need to, be humble enough to say, you know what, I'm not that important. And I need to take time away for myself and refresh and get with God for more than just a couple of minutes.
Good. Ed, how do you go about that, building in rest?
Hey, Rod, I was thinking that was great, Patricia. One of the thoughts that came to my mind, Rod, as Patricia was talking, is I have to read the different gauges correctly. For example, my physical gauge could be reading fine. My emotional gauge could be reading low. And what I have to do is sometimes when my emotional gauge is reading low, all that's telling me is that I just need to get alone. And maybe for me, it might be I'm gonna go and I'm gonna listen to praise and worship music, or I'm gonna go and I'm gonna go serve. I'm just gonna do something that is so different from what I normally have been doing. So what I would say, Raj, for me, what I find helpful is reading my gauges. My spiritual gauge can be fine. My relational gauge can be fine. My professional gauge can be fine, but maybe my social gauge is reading low. So instead of reading something into it, I'll just ask myself, what's the gauge telling me? Because if I don't read the gauge right, I'm going to beat myself up. I'm gonna put guilt on me that should not be there. And so that's something that I have found helpful, Roger, is reading the gauges.
That's good. That's good. Even extroverts like me, we need silence and solitude once in a while to let things filter out and settle down a little bit. Good. Anyone have a question you'd like for any of our guests? I see something in the chat here. Let me see what it says. Yeah, guy's not waiting. He's Bob Lichty's not wearing his mask for the meeting. He's had cataract surgery and he's wearing it for that purpose. Other questions you may have or tips that you may have for how you're managing priorities in time? We don't assume to have it all figured out yet.
Roger, I have a question for Ed. You know, you're talking about reading your gauges. What are the ways in which you do that? What are certain practices that you have with each one of those facets of life that you do read your gauges? What are practices you have?
Good question. You're muted, Ed. There you go. Oh. Once more.
Thank you, Raj.
Yeah.
I have a list of all the different gauges. For example, financial gauge, emotional gauge, mental gauge, physical gauge. So let's say, for example, I'll give you a good example. Every so often I find myself getting overwhelmed with whatever it might be. And so I'm going to look at those different gauges. Okay. And let's say that my relational gauge, as I think of that, the reason why I'm so overwhelmed with this particular moment is because right now there's a player that him and I are not seeing eyeball to eyeball on something. I remember, I would say, Roger, in 21 years here at Liberty, there's probably been 2 meetings that haven't gone the way that I thought they ought to go. And so it put a strain on my relationship. So the first thing I did is I had to say, okay, God, what can I learn about you from this? What can I learn about myself from this? And what can I learn about him from this? So, brother, to answer your question, once I identify what that gauge is, then I'm going to ask the appropriate questions. Now, if I ask the wrong question about God, myself, and others, I'm going to get the wrong answer. So I got to make sure that I'm asking the right question. So for me, in dealing with this relational gauge with a player, I ask myself, God, what can I learn about you? What can I learn about myself? And what can I learn about the player? So that helped me to walk through it. And right now, I would say I'm about 2 feet from sliding into home with the relationship, because the enemy tried to use that to get me to wonder what in the world was going on. And I can honestly say that we would never say something or do something that's going to offend or hurt somebody. But I'm about 3 feet from home base. In fact, the other day I said, hey, I got an idea. And I bounced the idea off of me. He said, let me pray about it. So I said, that's a good sign. So I hope that answers the question, brother.
Good. Thanks, Aaron, for that question. Somebody else have a question you'd like to ask or a point you'd like to make?
Roger, I'd like to pick up on something. I think it's important that Patricia said, when she said she went off, to just get that rest she needed. And when she got back, she found that the ministry, everything ended up getting done somehow. And I think it's very important for us she mentioned the word humble, is to keep that mindset of humility, because God will definitely use us, but he definitely does not need us. And a lot of times we can get into that mindset where, man, gosh, if SIU football didn't have me, I mean, what would happen? You know, if Bradley basketball didn't have me around every now and then, how could they function? We're used, but we're definitely not needed.
Yeah, good point. Any final thoughts from anybody? Any more questions? Otherwise, we'll get a summary thought from each of our three guests in a moment.
Hey, Aaron, if you send me your email address, I'll send you that list that I have, or anybody else. It's egomes@liberty.edu. I'll send it to you.
EGOMES. Good. How about Patricia? Would you please give us a summary thought, if you would, related to managing priority and time and margin?
So I think for me, the prioritizing what's important versus what's urgent, kind of like I said at the beginning, is really where I start with that. And then making sure I prioritize people over the schedule. I also tend to be type A, and I like to know what's going to happen, even though it might change. I just need to start with plan A. And these days with the pandemic, sometimes plan A is fuzzy. And so being willing to accept that and starting my day with prayer, with Jesus, so that I have the right attitude going into it, helps to clear the fuzz out of the schedule sometimes, and just making sure that I build in margin and make sure my priorities are correct.
Outstanding. Type A people like us like to quote Proverbs 16:3 that says, commit your works to the Lord and your plans will be established. But that assumes you have a plan. But we also like 16:9 that says, in his mind a man plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps.
That is my life verse,
wiggle room.
because I need to remember that.
Yeah, we need to leave some wiggle room for the Lord to engineer things. Exactly. Okay, Doug, your final thoughts in summary.
My final thoughts would be, I think it's important for us to not compare ourselves with each other in ministry.
Brilliant.
Because we're in different situations. I cannot do the things that Patricia does, a lot of the things that Ed does. And what I found is where people get in trouble is somebody single might be trying to do ministry like they're married, and somebody married might be trying to do ministry like they're single. And that's going to be a real disaster.
Very good. Our stations in life often determine number of hours that we work, often determine how we go about those things. And so to make comparisons across those things is absolutely foolish, counterproductive, and ruins a lot of relationships. Well done, Doug. Thank you. Ed, any final thoughts, sir?
Yeah, great thoughts, folks. I would say, Rod, one, that my relationship with God it's a relationship. And I think sometimes people will try to make their relationship your relationship. And I have to make sure that I'm making my relationship with God the relationship that I know God wants it to be, where I'm at. The other thing is honest evaluation. You know, when I think of when we talk about discipleship, you know, am I spending more time? Like, for example, I have our guys in 3 groups: high interest, some interest, no interest. High interest are the guys who are intentional about their relationship with God. So I ask myself, where am I spending my time? Now, if I'm spending all of my time with those guys that are in the no interest, those are the unsaved guys, then am I really developing the leaders that I am going to need to help me do the work of the ministry? So we have to ask those honest questions. And again, to make disciples, it takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. And so that's something that I have found helpful, Roger, is who am I spending my time with? And then the other thing is again, you're not going to get it all done in 1 week. You're not going to get it done in 1 month. So my wife's dad, he was a pastor over 50 years, same church, Roger.
Wow.
And Dad always said, my wife's dad always said, you got to keep on working the farm. Keep on working the farm. So if I'm being faithful with where I have been planted, it's more about being faithful than it is about being successful.
Yep.
So those are just a few thoughts that I would share with our folks, Roger.
Love it. That's fantastic.
Roger, I'd like to pick up on one thing that Ed said about the time thing. When I became a Christian, the first book I read other than the Bible was The Lost Art of Disciple Making by Leroy Himes, Navigator. And on the last page, I've still had this on any Bible I've ever had in 30 years. On page 188, last thing he said, Ed, was this: when God grows an oak, he takes years. A toadstool can come up overnight. Faithful and skillful disciples, workers, and leaders take time to build. And actually, a lot of ministry efforts, Ed, we've been creating a lot of toadstools and very few oaks.
Yeah, great.
Well said. Yeah. Everybody, thanks so much. Appreciate your thoughts about this, your work with this, your modeling of it for lots of us. Regardless of our station in life, the Lord's working in us. We have to trust him for how we paint the parameters of how much time to use, when, with whom, all of that stuff. Pray about that. Look for guidance. Talk to your teammates, your colleagues, and how do you manage this stuff? Because from season to season, it also changes. Our roles change. All kinds of things change all the time. We have to be dynamic with this. And throughout Jesus' ministry, you can watch him change with whom he's spending time, and spending more and more time with his 12, and certainly with his 3, and obviously spent more time with them than he did the 5,000 whose level of interest was, let's have lunch. The 3 were a little more committed than that. Yeah. Hey, may I ask, please, Diana Morgan, would you please pray to wrap things up today? There you are.
Heavenly Father, we just thank you for this day that you've given us. We thank you for this wisdom that you've let these people impart to us as to how to manage ourselves and our time, and to make us better witnesses for you, for one thing, to give you glory. And we just thank you, Lord, that they have fed us with this information, and we just pray that we can take it to heart and work it into our lives as well. And I just pray, Lord, that you go with each of us today and be with us as we do our ministry, and watch over us until we come together again. And I just praise your holy name and give you the glory and the honor and the praise. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thanks,
Amen.
everyone. Appreciate our guests in particular, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Hey, Roger, thank you. Thank you for being a great resource for all of us.